I'm okay, I'm okay. So go ahead and kiss me like you miss me. Moving slowly forward. I don't mind, I don't mind. We may be crashing, but the sky won't fall. If it does, I wanna have it all. Thunder doesn't know how fast we fall. We can have it all. We can have it all. Moving slowly forward. I don't mind. I don't mind. We may be crashing, but the sky won't fall. If it does, I wanna have it all. Thunder doesn't know how fast we fall. We can have it all. We may be crashing, but the sky won't fall. If it does, I wanna have it all.
What a good day. What a wonderful thing you're doing here.
We need to find more formats like you're doing now to keep this going now, and also when we get back.
Everything in those comments is so empowering, so supportive, so beautiful, and that is what we do in the room every month.
This was not 100% what I expected, which is good.
People will really, really need it.
It's really important to us to use singular sensation, yes, as a safe gathering place, but also as a place to amplify and support and offer a safe space too.
How'd you get so good at this?
Hi. Hi, everyone. Welcome. It's really great to be here. Acknowledging the space. That was a really good land acknowledgement we had right there. I like the language from that, and I know that it's always good to bring those in. And one thing that I also like to do is to acknowledge, like, within the platform we're on StreamYard, coming to you at YouTube. So we're also existing on Lenni Lenape land. We're existing on Ohlone land, and multiple bands of Ohlone, depending on how it comes to you, and many places in between. And that's sort of like digital way, even though we have the benefit of having this through TAPA and having a sort of a Toronto connection is, I think, a good thing to think about. My name's Ian Garrett. I wear a few hats, which is good because in the winter time, I don't have a lot of hair, so I need hats. And of those, and one of the reasons that I'm here today is I'm director of an organization called the Center for Sustainable Practice in the Arts. I also teach ecological design for performance at York University. And as an artist, I'm part of a collective called Toaster Lab that does mixed reality technology performance, which relates a lot to how we're doing this, but then also works as an eco-scenographer with a background primarily in lighting and media and scenic, looking at how we look at design through an eco-critical lens. And that's a lot of what I'm going to be asking you about today as we have our conversation. The sort of structure of today, if you're joining these for the first time, is that we're going to spend about the next hour in conversation, and we invite your questions during that time. We'll try and get to them, as many of them as possible, but I'm excited to have this conversation. I want to turn it over to our panelists to give a little bit of introduction to themselves as well, so you know who will be talking. I'm going to first turn it over to our friend and colleague, Shannon Lea Doyle.
Hi, hello everyone. My name's Shannon Lea Doyle, and I'm a designer in theater. I do set, costumes, and some lighting and projection. And I mostly work out of the place that I'm based, which is Toronto Art to Toronto, which has been introduced as the Dish with One Spoon territory. That's where I am right now. And I have been working for about 7 years building this creative practice. In 2018, I founded a company with two of my colleagues, Alexandra Lord and Michelle Tracy. That's a design company that leads with sustainable practices, and we try to lead with our values as much as we lead with our creative ideas. So that is how I met Ian, and it's the channel through which I do a lot of work in a sustainable area.
Excellent. Thank you, Shannon. I'm going to next turn to, we had an order preset. Our colleague Ming Wong is having some technical difficulties. She'll be with us again in a moment. She was here. She's finding the right spot. The heat is messing with her Wi-Fi. That's what I'm going to go with right now. So for right now, I'm going to turn it over to Michelle Bohn.
Hello. My name is Michelle Bohn. I'm a costume and set designer. My pronouns are she, her. I'm originally from Skanyatarati near Jojake. I've been all over the place though since I left Montreal. I lived in the States for many years. I've been back in Canada for about 5 years. And I now live in Kathmandu, but I am currently in Stratford, Ontario. Yeah, I mean, I'm not organized or affiliated with an organization that is eco-friendly as far as theater goes, but my practices, I try to be conscious of the world that we live in, of the fact that, you know, we're borrowing time and air and land and trees from the next generations. And I try to do my part as a human being, both in my own life and in my practices in theater, to minimize my impact as much as possible and to offset my impact as much as possible.
Excellent. Thank you. Oh, Ming is back with us. Autumn, do you mind if we go to Ming, who has rejoined us before we come? Ming, we're doing our round of introductions.
Excellent.
A little bit
Sorry about that, guys.
No worries. We're getting a tour of your home.
You've seen all of my house now. I'm a Toronto-based costume designer. I've been working in costume design for probably over 15 years now. Feels like a long time. And I've worked mostly in Toronto. I've had the opportunity to go to the Citadel in Edmonton. And yeah, I've been lucky enough to kind of keep my finger in the pot theater-wise in the Toronto scene for quite some time. So I feel very lucky.
All right, thank you. And now, Autumn, fresh off the road.
I mean, my name's
literally. I mean that only in the most literal sense.
Absolutely, in true great Canadian sense, driving down the only road in Canada. Anine, my name is Autumn Copway. I am the technical director for Vancouver Opera, but I do have a past actually in Toronto at the Canadian Opera Company for many, many years, as well as at the Grand Theatre in London and Carousel Players and a few others kind of speckled throughout the career. Meg and I have done many shows together. Lovely GGS style. In terms of sustainability, Vancouver Opera is actually moving ahead quite positively. I've been able to actually start us on the Climate Smart certification program. So we are trying to look at our GHG emissions and kind of start to really analyze. Right now, we are in the metrics for measuring stage, so we're still not quite at the we're going to make the first steps, but we are figuring out how much we actually use. So that's kind of a brief aspect of where Vancouver Opera is sitting. A lot of my passion kind of comes from this type of sustainability building. And as a technical director, I actually have a huge influence over how we build things, which is really convenient. I'm kind of an oddball, I think, looking around the table with a bunch of designers. So I'm actually usually that person that kind of interacts with you guys and tries and helps figure out how we can do something sustainably. So I'm really excited to be here.
We're all a little odd here.
We work in art.
Yes, we had to get here in some way. Thank you for that, and thank you all for being here today. I sent a few questions ahead. I'm gonna jump past the first one because we started getting into that, and I think that we'll get there because we're gonna be talking throughout the day in talking about work that is done in a sustainable or ecologically beneficial way, and I'm actually wondering, and I was inspired by bringing to light something that's already happening in Vancouver. What you were just talking about, Autumn, is that if there is a production of your own or others that you've seen that you feel sort of exemplifies some of the values you think are important within sustainable design and sustainable production.
Yeah, I mean, so I kind of have a double-edged story here. So I think a lot of my passion has actually been spurred because of my mentors at the Grand Theatre in London. So Paul Fujimoto-Peel and Andrea Zurich, who were amazing in way back when. My very first show there that I really TD'd was made of these really crazy rocks. And most times, as many designers know, we design rocks out of styrofoam, and it's atrocious and it's really bad for us. So they were really supportive of me trying to find a different method to try and make these crazy rocks that are all over the set. And what we ended up doing is just using recycled plywood and chicken wire and then a lot of canvas and just kind of piece that together just because it was easier to tear than apart. We could reuse the chicken wire somewhere else. We could dispose of the wood. So that was really a starter process in my discovery of there are other ways to build things. Just because we've always done it that way doesn't mean that it's the right way. And so a lot of my own TD work has always been like that and trying to navigate those worlds. Most recently, I had the lovely Patrick Rizzotti, who is out in Vancouver now. He was in Chicago and a few other places. But so he actually designed one of our pandemic operas. We, out in BC, we were actually able to produce a 16-person opera, including staging. And if you want to check it out, it's on Vancouver Opera's website. It's called A Mall and the Night Visitors. And actually, if you see the set is actually made of all recycled material. It's a nest wall that we've built across a huge arcing stage. And we built it completely out of recycled material, old barn board. We were in the midst of cleaning out our shop, so anything that was in there came out. A lot of the fabrics were also recycled. Patrick was really good with us about looking at something and kind of taking something from nothing. And so I think that's the start. I think that it's a collaborative process to try and build sustainably. You need designers who are willing to make those kind of suggestions and also work within confines, because sometimes obviously we couldn't get as much recycled wood as we could just purchasing. So we had to kind of move within our limitations of this is what we have and this is what we can do. And I think that's really what the collaborative process and how we can actually move forward with sustainability is. People like me as a technical person, and then the designers really coming together and working together to kind of create that sustainable way. And that way you don't lose any art.
Right. And that's awesome too. And I feel like there is consensus on the panel, because I'm watching everybody's head nod up and down as a designer, like, yes, that is the TD that we want to work with that allows us to do this. Turning it over to my colleagues in design, my comrades in design. I don't know. I don't want to make it too. I don't want to go too far.
It's good. It's good.
We unionized. The ADC unionized at the beginning of the year. It's okay. Are there standout productions, yours or others, that you either aspire to, or that you're particularly proud of ways that you've been able to express your values and sustainability on stage?
I'll jump in because I have an example of production that's not dissimilar from Autumn's amazing work. That sounds incredible. It also sounds like your designer is like really approaching things in a really exciting way. So yay, I'm totally gonna check that out. The thing that's it's reminding me of is a show I did with Native Earth before the pandemic, so 2 years ago. And it was a show that was called This Is How We Got Here by Keith Barker. It was directed by Keith Barker. I was the set designer. So part of the play was set in a forest, so I knew we needed some trees. And it was a success for me because we used what was on hand in a similar way to Autumn, what I think you have approached with your production that you're speaking of, except that I was able to use another designer's work from another show at a different theater and bring it into my show, which was something I'd really been excited about doing for a long time. And Joanna Yu, who's an amazing Toronto designer, maybe based in Stratford now, was generous enough, and we had a bit of alignment in values, and that she was willing to allow for her trees that were like these massive, beautifully painted birch trees from a set that she had done at the Tarragon in Toronto be taken down on their strike day, picked up by us from Native Earth, and brought into our theater, where we chopped them apart, installed them in quite a different style, but essentially didn't change them from their existence as like trees in one show into trees in another. So it was a really exciting way to reuse something. And sometimes the stars don't align that way with all productions, but I think it's a good idea for designers to look at what other designers have already and think, how could I reuse this amazing artwork that's already being shown, and also maybe get over ego a little bit and like acknowledge like this is a collaboration in a certain level.
Yeah, I'm actually, and this is only because I saw you agreeing with that wholeheartedly, Michelle. I was wondering if I might turn both the same question to you, and then wonder if that's something that you've had the experience of doing, or would like to have the experience of doing.
A bit of both. I mean, I think that design as well as being sustainable, both are very much collaborative processes. You have to have more than like just yourself as a designer on board to make it successful, I think. You need at least the people that you're working with directly, if not like the entire company that you're working with on board for that. And I think that it's becoming easier, even in the last like couple of years, to sort of pitch these ideas and have the people around you kind of nod their heads the way we have been in here, and go, oh yeah, like I think it's just tuning your brain into a different station basically than what we have been trained to do, at least in my past, and that was like, 20 some odd years ago. So what I was trained in as far as design was that it is ego. You put yourself into the design, you put your ideas, your concepts, your collaboration with the director and the other designers into the design. And I think a lot of sustainability, if you're looking to reuse, reduce, recycle, you have to be creative in other ways. And you can see that as a different extension of ego, but some people see it as compromising their design or their ego or whatever. And I think that you need to sort of take your ego out of it, which you should be doing for a really good collaboration anyway, I think at least. And as far as shows that I've worked on, I mean, nothing jumps out exactly as like the most successful iteration of that, but I did just have a really great experience remotely designing a show at the Guild in Charlottetown, where it was in part because I couldn't be there, I had to get creative, and so I was buying furniture from like Kijiji and from Facebook Marketplace, and like sending someone to the Restore with the poor director a lot of the time was someone going like to the Restore with me in FaceTime, and finding like stuff that we could use, which, the Guild previously had always hosted Anne and Gilbert, which was not actually their show, so they don't have a huge amount of stock. So I was trying to find stuff that is a good option for what we were looking for our show, but also stuff that could potentially be used down the road if they keep it. But it was a great way to sort of try to, instead of ordering everything off of like the internet, which I very much could have done, I was like, well, why don't we do it this way and save some stuff from landfill?
Thank you. I think that's an excellent example. Ming, I want to turn you to come to, because I identify the use of stock as something that also happens more often in when you're not buying in costume land, and I don't know if you have the same realization, or it seems as something new in the reuse that we've just been talking about on the scenic side of things.
Well, I think from a costume point of view, like a lot of costume designers start with low budget shows. They don't have a lot of money to begin with. We can't always buy new things. So I almost feel like by nature, a lot of designers are trained to thrift first, build if you have to. But I think every single show that I've worked on in my career has had something bought from a secondhand store, whether it be shoes or shirts or, regardless of period. There's always, oh, I have to run to the Value Village and grab a shirt, or, and it's not just because of budget all the time. Sometimes it's just something you might not be able to find at the H&M. So I think coming from a costume design point of view, I don't do set, but I think that it's kind of in our nature to look in that direction first, and then kind of go, okay, we can't find it at the Value Village or the Salvation Army, so what do we do now? And then I started when I first started working in costumes, I worked at a rental studio, a costume rental studio. And that's all stock, and that's all putting things together in different ways that makes a new costume. So I don't see using stock as, oh, I'm using somebody else's costume, and I don't want to do that. I mean, sometimes if it's a very recognizable piece, then you have to kind of work a little bit harder to make it your own. But I think there's always opportunity when there's a stock available to you to really try to use it to your advantage. And I think we all know, when you design something and you draw something, it's a negotiation of whether you can find it. If you can't find it, what's acceptable to you and the actor and the director and the whole team as to what works for the character. And if you stray from that vision, it's still a designed costume. You know what I mean? So yeah, I think, we just, as costume designers, and I know I've worked with all of these designers, and, we've gone to the Value Village to get stuff and, done big stock pulls. So I think there's a little bit more, and it might not be with sustainability in mind, but we kind of just naturally do it as a first step.
Thank you. I think that's excellent. And one of the things that comes to mind, and coming at it also as someone who does a lot of lighting and video, part of the question almost sounds strange to me, because no one creates a new light for a new show. All my lights look like everybody else's lights. All the gels look like everybody else's gels. All the technology is the same. It's the combination of those things and the dramaturgical integrity of what ends up on stage as the final product ends up being what's important and what that vision is. So you can, whether or not you're pulling out individual pieces or where they come from, they become their own thing. They're transformed through the process that we go through with things. Mm-hmm. And I know that one of the things that I oftentimes the students identify as one of the limitations or one of the ways to consider that we consider sustainability in theater and theatrical design differently than one might in another field, another design field, even like architecture, is that that's what our goal is. We're serving whatever that final stage picture is, or whatever the performance and the aesthetic is. Whereas in architecture, maybe your concept is the most sustainably built house ever, and that becomes the primary aesthetic. And so we're always sort of balancing those things together. And as you pointed out, Ming, it's something that's very much ingrained in the type of way that we work. That why spend the time on creating something new if it already exists? And I think that it's important also to underscore that it's not about cheapening or making it saving money. It's about what is the best option given all the parameters and considerations. As we've come together, and even if this is more recent thought, I might turn it around into sort of how thinking or actively thinking about what you've been doing through a sustainable lens or an eco-positive lens may have changed or altered at all recently how you've worked from over the course of your career as a designer. Autumn also as a technician and technical director. It's an important part of that too. But if you've been proactively thinking about sustainability more recently, have you noticed how that's changed or altered the way that you approach things or the way that you think about your work? Open that. Yeah, go ahead, Autumn. It looks like you're ready to jump.
Oh, sure. Well, I have a bit of a thing, and I'm going to throw to the designers. So COVID obviously has triggered a number of things for us working at home. I know a lot of us haven't been actually doing live shows or doing shows at all. But prior to that, one of our big GHG emission sources that we've discovered is actually our paper consumption. Printouts, drawings, lovely colorings. So we use a lot of paper. And we noticed during COVID, as we're comparing our last couple of years and paper consumption and COVID consumption, we were able to produce 6 shows, 2 concert series and 4 shows. So we were actually producing during this year. But we had less paperwork, obviously, because we weren't in the same facility. We generally weren't constantly in contact. And so we found that a lot of our paper consumption actually went down. And so that was a big change, but also something that we could actively be doing very minimally. And I wonder, as we are moving forward and as we are thinking about those things, as designers, I noticed that a lot more of our work has started coming through, our emails and those kind of things. Ming, I know that you guys are still drawing and that stuff, but working with Joanna at NTS this year, she was all basically digital, which was crazy to me. But another way to think about kind of our sustainability and how we are learning how to work in this, I think COVID actually may have pushed us a little far and made us start thinking about specifically those little tiny things that we take for granted.
Yeah, like you mean using paper less and digital surfaces more?
Yeah. I literally printed out 3 drawings per show. That's it. No other ones. 3.
Yeah, I mean, it's interesting. And I've thought about this with Ian. Ian's also my mentor, about choices, like breaking down choices, like in terms of carbon output and trying to understand how much carbon goes into a stack of paper is that big versus my laptop, And I think there's so many things to think about. There's so many things to think about, like the fact that you can, some paper is like a renewable resource if it's being farmed or, trees are being chopped down sustainably, whereas laptops aren't. There's a lot of mining that goes into, there's countless, innumerable things that go into a laptop or an iPad. And the energy of an email versus the energy of a paper handout is something that we certainly should be thinking about. But I have heard, Ian could probably speak to this more, that sometimes, if you want to get information across to a bunch of people in a room, sometimes giving them a paper handout is actually less carbon than projecting it onto the wall for an hour.
Also, napkin cads are way easier. I can doodle on them and explain things. Napkin cads.
So, I think that this idea to just reassess how offices are run is amazing. And I think that kind of attention is well worth all of our time and attention in theaters and across all offices, workspaces. But I also think that for artists who are still working on paper, that it's cool. They can still make their drawings on paper and that's not something that should hold them back or feel guilt around. Especially as technology, the accessibility to technology is always a little bit touch and go across our country and depending on where you are in the world, but more specifically our country. Sometimes paper books just get the job done,
I think something that's yes, and I could natter on about.
I know, it's like open the can of worms.
I feel like you're trying to set me up to do that, and I don't want to take over the conversation like that. But what I'm going to say before coming back to this question of maybe how this is even that thinking has changed the way that you've worked and considering things is that from what you're saying, Autumn, it sounds a lot like the company looked at where there was impact and looked at ways and then saw paths for reduction. And I think that's an important, in my estimation, it's a more important process to go through, seeing where your impact areas are and making choices based off of how you can change there, versus like saying paper good, paper bad, email good, email bad. That it depends on where you are, what you're using, what area that you're in, etc. for doing things. Because yes, Jen, you point out, and this comes from there's a book called How Bad Are Bananas, which has a catalog of like many everyday things and what their emissions factors are. And there's information there about like if you send a very large email with a lot of attachments to one person, it could have a very similar impact as like printing that out. But I think when you start talking about mass amounts of paper, you're talking about one thing. When you start talking about the way that you're modifying small amounts of things and syncing things up between different collaborators, then that becomes like, if you get anything from tonight, you're going to find out that everything is complicated.
And I think that it's so true that, like, you know, the macro movement that you're working on, Autumn, is like the ultimate goal, like creating these policies that are going to be in place long after your work is done at this theater. You move on to another one. I think that's the real impact that we should all continue to like focus on, like those macro impacts.
Yeah, when I was mentioning paper, the reason is we are looking at that metric to measure, and as a whole company, not necessarily as design, as a whole company, if you think about an opera company, we're printing scores. It's actually our marketing team that actually really hurts because they are printing on non-recycled materials. They're printing with waxes and all kinds of colorings. And so that actually has really been our world. And I can't find my book right now, but I am a paper person. I have to write down everything. My to-dos are 10 pages long, but I am still very paper heavy. I just try to now think about my sustainability in paper of, this is recycled, I'll take this one. Yeah. And I think that's, yeah, exactly. Everything has a cost at the end of the day. We design in theater, everything has a cost. And it is how we think about those things. And I agree. Don't feel bad if you're still on paper. I love people on paper. Napkin Cat is my favorite. But it's important to kind of take that step back and think about, okay, do I really need to print this drawing? Probably not. I could probably just doodle on my hand and explain the drawing rather than.
Yeah, I like to, when in teaching, I like to tell students when we're going through technical drawings, and hopefully this hasn't led to York sending out a number of designers doing substandard technical drawings. But that the important thing is that whoever you're asking to do something understands what you're asking of them. Not like there's no right or wrong drafting. Is it being installed, built, etc., crafted correctly based off of the information that you've provided. Like that's the purpose of that drawing, not I'm the best drafts person. If you're the best drafts person and you put everything in a way that somebody can't read it, it doesn't really matter. It's just a pretty drawing. Michelle and Ming, we've started to get in a couple of audience questions that I think are really good and tie into some of the questions that we had set up before. But I'm wondering if there's anything that you've been considering in your practice as you've thought about or want to consider in your practice as you've thought about being more sustainable, more eco-positive in your work that has changed or has led you to think about a change in your practice?
Yeah, for sure. For me, I'm still a paper person as well. Like I do my costume renderings with paint and paper. But what has shifted for me is during the pandemic, I did research on more sustainable companies for paints, for watercolors. And for gouache, and came across an amazing Indigenous woman-owned business called Beam Paints. So I've been buying from them. They handcraft their paints on Manitoulin Island. And their packaging is minimal. It's either in beeswax or in little wooden pallets. And it's all, it all goes, you can use the beeswax again, you can use the wooden pallets for other things, and the paint eventually goes away. And I've also been obviously trying to, like Autumn, choose better paper to use. And the other thing that I found out, because I spent a few months working in film and TV, which I do on and off in my career anyway, but it was the only thing for the last few months. And so what I found out is that there are companies who will take like all the paper that we use in film and TV and in theater, like when you print out scripts and stuff like that, you can send that stuff to places to get bound into like notepads to use. Or like sometimes what I do is I just take the stuff that I've been using and tear it up in half, because if it's only been printed on one side, staple it together and use that as my like scrap notepad. But I have stopped printing as much stuff. That is definitely something that I've been more aware of. So I don't print as much. But even going into like Ming was saying, like we always, as costume designers, we take from stock. We go to thrift stores, vintage stores, stuff like that. I've been more conscious of doing those steps first and not being like, it's the afterthought. It's where I go when I can't find things. Like I go through stock first. I go to Value Village next. I go to sustainable options first. Walmart has never been on my list because I dislike them intensely. But when I found out a few years ago that if you return something to Walmart, they don't restock it, they throw it out, I was like, and we're done forever. So like it might be the place that you can get cheap socks for a show, but you can get cheap socks somewhere else, So there are other options. And I think it's a matter of doing the research when you have time to do so, of where you're shopping, where you're buying your paints from, where you're buying your paper from, where are you buying your clothes from. And if one thing the pandemic has given us, it's that time. But there's time for designers in between shows too, where we can do that work and still be working and still be busy.
I think it's really important to share these resources too, Michelle. Like I love that you passed on that resource you found, because I'm sure everyone has one or two places that they like to buy things from.
Yeah, if we can, it would be awesome if we get if there's a link to that paint that we can put into the chat. I think that would be excellent. Ming, I want to turn it to you too. I think I want to recognize also that like one of the things that just like people shouldn't necessarily don't feel guilt around paper if that's part of your process, but also that a lot of these suggestions end up being about like reorienting so that the order in which you do things that you're already doing align with your values more, as opposed to completely rethinking your practice. Ming, do you have a thought towards some way that you've changed thing or want or are looking to change something?
Well, I think like the paper thing is interesting. I'm all on my iPad. So for drawings, I'm strictly digital, but like Autumn, when I take notes and I have to-do lists, I write it down. Like I can't type it for some reason. It's just not the same for me. So that's the one thing that I've held on to is I still have a notebook and but I have scrap paper. I have a whole pile of scrap paper. But I have enjoyed not getting 15 versions of schedules because it changes, minutely from day to day. So that's something that I've embraced and I'm happy about. But we always find a use for the paper anyway. Like use it as scrap or make sure it gets recycled. But I think the one thing we thought of a lot when the pandemic first started was the small stores, the small grocery store, like whether it be for food, for the butcher, whatever. I think for me that kind of translated too into who can we support locally, as opposed to going to H&M first or the Bay. If you can't thrift it and you can't buy it, or if you can't build it, where could you go that's, you know, somebody that might be locally making things and employing people that are from here or from a small community somewhere in the country. I think that's really been a little bit of a focus for me lately. And I hope to, you know, take that into when theater comes back in earnest, that, you know, that's something that theaters can look at and take seriously, because it is more expensive to support local, but, you know, it's the carbon footprint. It's, you know, is it ethical? Who's making the garment? There's a lot of things to think about in that way. Like it's a trade-off for money, but it's almost like it's better for your conscience if
it's worth it. Absolutely worth it.
Yeah, it's absolutely worth it. And, you know, like Michelle said, you know, supporting a small paint maker who lives on Manitoulin, you know, I'd rather do that than make I don't know, whoever owns Zara more money. That's gonna last the show, and then it's gonna go in the dumpster because it isn't made to last, you know.
That's a really good point.
I feel like I read some list recently that whoever it is who does own Zara is like on like a 25 like richest people in the world sort of thing. I'm not surprised. We don't need to worry about them. They'll be fine. If not, they should be giving away a little bit more money again, trying to keep from there. Autumn, I saw you unmute Michelle as well. Let's go, Autumn, Michelle, if that's okay.
I was just going to say that as much as we're looking locally, I think it's also really impressive at the fact, specifically Ming and Michelle, I know you guys do costume. Shannon, I'm sorry if you do, but I know you two do costume. I think it's really impressive in specific about costume, because you guys can really take stock, yes, but you see it in a very different manner than I'm a TD. I don't quite envision a pant to be somehow created into a pantaloon to match with a period piece. My brain doesn't work like that, unfortunately. And so I very much depend on that creative mind that you guys are all talking about, is that stepping back and going, can I make this into what I need? And how do I do that? How do I not necessarily adjust my design, but how do we collaborate to make those things happen? Mm-hmm. And I think it's really, really impressive on the costume level specifically. And I actually just wanted to note that I don't think a lot of people realize that everything that we do in theater is temporary. So by temporary, I literally mean we throw everything into the garbage afterwards. Most theaters, I'm in opera, so that's a different subject, and I won't get into how we store things. But in theater, when I was working a lot in theater, there are no storage spaces. Specifically in Toronto, there is not a lot of storage. So keeping a show is actually more expensive for people. So they tend to throw it out, which is super problematic. And Shannon, you mentioned even just reaching out and finding out if there's other things out there that you could go and steal before they put into the dumpster. That very much is a huge aspect that I think we need to get more involved in. I do think that costumes tends to be a little nicer with that. I don't know if you guys have an interconnection and talk, but costumes seem to at least keep more stock than sets do. Sets generally just get tossed out, and it generally gets forgotten that as soon as it's on stage, everybody walks away. But at the end of it, it's me and my guys that crush it all and put it into a dumpster.
Yeah, I mean, when I was living in New York City, there are a couple of organizations that actually help with that, where they bring in past set pieces or pieces of fabric that you didn't use in your show, and they will resell them. They'll store them and resell them at a lower cost to like smaller companies and stuff like that. I know that there's like Ready, Set, Recycle in Toronto that I don't think people use enough. And they're ready and willing to help people. But the other thing that I was going to speak to at Ming is that it seems that green is now economically something that companies are latching onto. Like H&M now has a recycling program where you can bring in stuff. But like, again, and you know, Zara has like sustainable cotton and stuff like that. But again, it's a publicity thing to attract people who are interested in this stuff. So really doing the research is paramount in those cases. Like, is it still ethical? Where is it going afterwards? You know, where did it come from? All that stuff. And all of those things are interconnected. Like, sustainability is connected to all of those things. But yeah, no, I would like to see more recycling for sure. And you're right, it costs money to store things, but there are companies who could do that for the community.
It's also possible to think, and this is the thing that I was going to say, I've started to shift in my own practice, is I talk to the TDs more and the PMs more. And that's been amazingly rewarding because they've got such good brains. Talking to them a bit more before I start designing about what's possible, and then also about whether we can design and build in order for the set to come apart at the end. Like, is it ever possible to use screws, not nails? Like, can we pay for carpenters for that extra week of time to, oh, is it so loud? I don't know. I think my business street. So can we pay carpenters, like, you know, the amount of money that we would spend maybe storing something, we invest that in people, time, labor to take something apart into like reusable pieces. It's always a question that can be like asked. I think it's a good question that gets things started in terms of spreading out these decisions just beyond aesthetics to more like practical,
for sure,
things. And you have to have good collaborators for that.
I think also asking what they have already, Shannon, like to what you're saying, like you're designing a set, like, you know, I'll get a list of like the duvetine that they have, but I'm like, okay, but like, what else do you have? Do you have risers sitting somewhere? Stuff like that.
Yeah, I think one of the interesting things that will come from COVID, and Autumn, you might confirm or deny whether or not this is an impact, is the current cost of lumber might actually make it actually economically more feasible, and we'll see as that supply chain comes like back online post COVID. I don't know. I'm very interested to see what will happen within like the builds that we get to when things have the opportunity to start getting built for in-person things again, and we're looking at theater budgets as opposed to film and TV, which may have still continued on, and you're looking at like the current, like, you know, I was joking with someone the other day that it's like, we might as well make this set out of gold because the lumber is just so expensive right now. I do want to bring us to, and I'm gonna roll us into this question a little bit. There has for a while in the UK, at least since 2012, been a mandate for funded organizations, not for individual artists, but for funded organizations. And this is actually specific in England. I'll specify more, not just the entire UK, but England. Arts Council England mandates some level of environmental reporting for all of its funded organizations, right? And there's a tool created by an organization, for those who aren't aware of it, called Julie's Bicycle. The tool is called the Creative Green Tools. There's a large project happening right now that hopefully they'll be adapted for Canadian use in early 2022. And so there's this question then that it's like, would a similar sort of system of requiring environmental work, Adam, you're just so excited to jump on this question. So, well, let's get into it. Like, what do you think the impacts would there be? There is the question of like, do you feel that it would lead to artistic sacrifices, or do you think that there's opportunities there? Autumn, go.
So I only do get really excited about this because I did a huge amount of research to Julie's Bicycle, because that's part of what we were looking at and trying to figure out. How do we measure what we're actually impacting? Because theater doesn't measure it. We have no metrics for measure. We just plow through, get the show done, get it out, get to the next one. And I noticed, we tend to just go, 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 go. And by doing that, we don't actually give ourselves time. So we spent some of COVID pulling ourselves back and looking at Julie's bicycle and Climate Smart. And we actually kind of trailed into Climate Smart because it offered similar things to Julie's bicycle, but it's more Canadian centralized. And so our network is actually grown through that. And who is a part of that includes travel agencies. So Harbor Air is a part of that. So we make choices in our travel based on how things move. I move a lot of shows around. Most operas are 3 trailers or 3 full containers worth. So I try and choose rail over transport. I try and choose something like Muskrat Transport, which is very conscious of their fuel consumption. But similarly, it's a lot about measuring those things and starting that process. And I wanted to actually jump in. I think Michelle, you had a comment earlier about it. I want to say that as a TD and coming from that world, oftentimes sustainability isn't at the forefront because people think it costs money. And if you can present some way to show the offset of costs. I also work on a number of boards, and a lot of times what it is people want, this is the problem and this is the solution. They don't want to hear that we're doing terrible things. What they want to hear is, we do terrible things, but this show we can do this amazing thing. Because the but is actually what they're listening to. They don't want to hear about how we're doing terrible things. And I say that to the room. If you are a TD, if you are a designer, that is a very effective way I have found to get sustainability to the forefront. But you need to illustrate it. I think Shannon, I think you mentioned, how do we get the extra week of carpenters? The answer is that you sit down and you literally figure it out. The carpenters are going to cost me $1,000. The styrofoam is going to cost me $500, but it's also going to have to then be disposed of, which is going to cost me another $300. So I'm spending an extra $200 on labor, but I don't have anything going into the landfill, and we give our guys more work. Look at us, aren't we good? But it has to be presented that way. And so I strongly encourage, when you're starting to go down that road of how do we do this, presenting something as, this is the problem and this is my maybe creative solution, tends to go a little farther on those producing levels, because nobody wants to spend money and they think sustainability means spending money.
Yeah, you're totally right. And I think that having colleagues like yourself and Susie Gallo, who I was working with at Native Earth, who are game to have those conversations and figure it out together, makes all the difference. Sure.
And I don't necessarily think it's like the way the question poses here, like making artistic sacrifices. Like I think you don't look at it that way. You don't think, I have to do this, so I'm not going to get what I want. It's a matter of going into it thinking, okay, well, let's take this way instead of this way. You know, like I think there's many ways to achieve a final product, and I think it's just one of those things. If a company were to present itself to me that way, I don't think I'd necessarily view it as I have to choose between like what I really want and what I maybe, you know what I mean? Like I don't think anybody here would think that's a deal breaker design wise.
I mean, I think design is a creative problem-solving process for most of the process anyways. So I think this is just a different solution, a different process, a different problem to solve.
I think that it's been a couple of examples have sort of been highlighted in the course of conversation, but I'm wondering if this plays out differently at scale. I mean, we're already talking about like working operatically, which tends to be identified as being large, and there's logistics involved with there. We've got the connection to Stratford, and we've been talking about doing like theater in small venues around Toronto. We got this question about design on a larger budget and how this would impact conversations around stock for costumes or sets. Let's look at that on both sides of things. Like, how does scale of production change the conversation we're having about wanting to see a design realized in a sustainable way?
I mean, I think I can speak a little bit to Stratford since I'm here. I think the nice thing about a large place like Stratford that has many years of experience and a lot of space is that they also have a lot of space to store things. So there is a lot of stock. And so being in a larger place doesn't necessarily mean that as a designer, that your impact is larger. It might be. And I think that's entirely up to the designer as to how much stock they use versus how much they want built, on their custom design. I can say that, I myself, when I was designing All's Well That Ends Well last year, / sometime in the future, myself and Scott Wentworth, the director, had sort of agreed that we were going to honor the space that is the new Tom Patterson Theater. And so my set design, I was designing both sets and costumes. I decided to make it more about the costume design bringing us into the world and the set design being that you're in this new space. And so I was hoping that my design would be a little less impactful as far as like environmental stuff, and that was sort of, there were many reasons for it, but that was one of the considerations on my part, because I have started to be more conscious and I'm trying to make more conscious choices. So there's a lot of set and props here, a lot of costumes, but also a lot of, well, not right now, but usually there's a lot of people employed. So it's sort of a balance of, how do we do this in a way that we're making sure that people have work to do, but also that we can use stuff that is already here to save on budget, to save on carbon footprint. And like, something that I have started doing as a designer that has nothing to do with any of the places that I work with is that I'm very conscious of my own carbon footprint. Like, as a designer, and I'm sure the other designers here can attest to this, you're going all over Hell's Half Acre, as it were, to find things sometimes. Like when you're going to the Value Villages and places like that, you are driving, you're using your car. So I have started, for each show that I do, when I have the money, which hopefully is more often, I make donations to places to offset my own carbon footprint. And I would do that with Stratford as well. But Stratford actually has a lot of resources here that you don't necessarily need to be crazy in how much you're expending as far as energy.
I can speak to Shaw, which is similar to Stratford in that they have massive stock. And being compared to the Toronto theaters that I would work at. I designed a set and costumes for a play called Getting Married there. And I recall that it was actually told to me by the head of wardrobe and the props master that the goal was to use 25% of my design as stock pieces. So that was cool to hear it, like being told as a designer, like, look, you are going to be needing to go through stock and the goal is 25%. So I think that it'd be interesting to find out how many or how much of my work actually ended up coming from stock, but I was conscious of that being a requirement there. The artisans who are employed at these theater palaces are so skilled, feel like they could do anything, and that if it was the desire of the designer in collaboration with the director to do things in a different way, it would be possible. Because at these theater companies, you have the best technicians you ever will have. So it's kind of like, it's an amazing opportunity, I think, to push the envelope.
Thank you. Ming, have you had experiences with different scales that have changed perhaps the way that you've made in such a way that might have an ecological thought behind it or impact?
Well, like Shannon said, like I'm doing a show for Shaw right now, and I think normally, like it's a kind of a natural instinct for me to think that some of the show is going to come from stock, but they were actually the first company to have a percentage in the contract, basically saying you have to, which is great. Like I have no qualms about it. But I think, that with the bigger theaters and bigger companies, they have a lot of stock, but then it really depends on what show you're doing. Like somewhere like the COC, when I designed a show there, the show is contemporary and they don't have contemporary stuff. So, the ability to pull from stock was not really realistic. We did some stuff, but it wasn't a lot. And I think even if I work for a smaller company that might not have stock available to pull from, we have a great network in Toronto of places like Tarragon, Ken Stage, Soul Pepper, that we can access the stock. We're all friends, we all know each other. So that's like the second thing that I do is see where can we borrow it from so that we don't have to buy it somewhere. So I think, yeah, the bigger places have more places to store things, but we're all connected. And I think it's also about opening up that network to like even younger designers or people that might not necessarily know that it's available to them, and that it's a good thing to be sharing with all like everybody, all the theaters.
Yeah. What are those key relationships that you feel are necessary to be able to make change like this? One of the most common things that refrains that I hear from an individual will be like, this other person within the chain of talking about producing a show, whether or not it's from an administration, whether or not it's or a producer, or whether or not it's coming from a shop or a designer or a technician, is that someone else sort of says like, well, I want to do this, but I wouldn't do this. So what are the key relationships and conversations that you feel that you need to have, aside from with just Autumn? And perhaps I'd also say Paul, I feel, is one of those DDs as well over at the Grand. But what are those conversations and relationships that you need to cultivate to be able to make these more sustainable choices?
I think just putting it out there that you are a sustainable designer or an eco scenographer. I found that as soon as I started, recognizing that as a desire to manifest in my career, I found other people who were wanting to work that way too. And I've had directors, because usually designers get hired by a director. Directors approach me or Triga Creative, like a sustainable design company, because they're interested in working in this way too. So I think just starting to talk about your desires and your interests, even if they're not something that you've put into practice yet, with as many people as possible, you'll find a network.
Yeah.
Agreed.
Oh, Michelle, go ahead.
No, I was saying I agree. Like if I have shared the idea that I want to, make this set out of stock or whatever, leftover fabric, which is one of my favorite things to do. It's like, where's all the spandex that you haven't used for the last few years? Can we use that? Like, people get into it. They're like, oh yeah, like, and then they start bringing you ideas. Like, they get inspired by what you're doing, and then jump on the bandwagon with you. I think it's actually, if you put it, as Autumn put it, if you put it in a positive light, people are more likely to be receptive to it. So you don't go like, or at least in my experience, and I also used to work in academia, so you don't go, you're doing this wrong. You'd be like, hey, can we try this instead? and nobody feels attacked or on the defensive. They're immediately part of the solution.
I think the phrase "it takes a village" comes in. I don't think that there is a non-essential network that you're not going to use in terms of creating a sustainable product. We're already a collaborative process. Theater is great because many minds make better work. And so the more people that are actually involved in your thought process of sustainability, the more ways you can actually affect those things. And I think, Ming, you pointed out network is 100% way up there. I think the other thing to do is including your friends and coworkers. Ming may have done a show at Shaw and it went into stock, and now Michelle is about to do it. And hey, I'm looking for this, but I'm working at Tarragon. Great, you can still call Shaw. It doesn't matter that you're not working at Shaw. You know them. Call them because they might be able to get it to you. And they might be able to get it to you because Ming's already out there and she's coming back to Toronto. So then you don't even include GHG carbon emissions. But that's that interconnection. And so I don't think that there is, I think that everybody is a part of your key kind of group when you're looking at sustainability, because the carpenters can help, the costume people can help, the design helps. And to be honest, even at the very top level, the producers help, because at some point in time, I am going to need money. And getting them on board is also key. So I think in terms of a collaborative process and what those network essentials are, I think it's all of us. I think, but in order to craft that, we have to put it in a positive light so that everyone does feel like they're connected. And I think that's, for us as a sustainability, as being that passionate about it, I think if we can convince others to be passionate, that those networks are actually what's going to change it.
If only we knew something about storytelling and messaging. Ming, you got called out a little bit in there. I wanted to make sure that that you got a chance to respond to that question before I actually move on into a slightly different direction.
I agree. It's the connectivity, it's the networking. There's not anybody that you shouldn't be talking to about it. And I think I do think more theaters, it's on their brains right now. So I think kind of now is the time to kind of go into it in that manner and just say, look, this is what I'd like to do for these reasons, and involve anybody who wants to listen, really, like involve the board if you want to. But I think just the more we make not a stand, but the more designers that kind of go into it that way, it'll become regular and normal and not unusual.
Excellent. That's it's interesting to hear it, because we're hearing lots of like, you've each been able to tell stories with like institutions that are open to this, and then other projects, and there's lots of companies being mentioned here that are open to it. So I think it's really really interesting to think like a lot of these barriers or challenges are becoming, which may or may not have existed, it might have just been the conversation wasn't happening, seem to be opening up where people are talking about them more. Something that's going to be talked about, this is important perhaps for the ADC members on the call, something that's going to be talked about in the coming year are contracts. PACT has put into their strategic plan that environmental sustainability is one of their primary focuses for the next 5 years, at least in terms of this strat plan. The ADC has struck a green committee. It's very nascent, and communicating with the IATSE Green Committee and our companions down to the south with United Scenic Artists in the US who have done something similar. So that there is this idea floating in the air of green writers, people who would like to put into their contracts the idea that they'd like to work more green and more sustainable. if there were to be provisions in a design contract, what do you think that those would look like, or what would you like them to look like? What sort of things would you like to see in your contract that would allow you to be more sustainable? An engager? I'm looking at you, Adam. Hold on.
I think
I have one.
Yeah.
Oh, you have. Sorry, do you want to go ahead, Shannon?
Oh, I was just going to say that I have a rider that I attach to projects. And I've shared the wording before. I know, I'm like, should I pull it up? Autumn,
Yeah,
look
pull it
at
up. You take a second to pull it up, and we'll go to Ming for a second. Ming, what were you going to say?
Well, I was just going to say, like, going from the Shaw percentage of like that being, I don't think it's actually in my contract, but like something like that could be very easily put in the contract, that a certain percentage has to come from stock. And I think further to that, you could say, you know, X amount has to be sourced locally, and then another X amount needs to be sourced, like ethically sourced. So yeah, I think that's a start. I think companies may be hesitant to put those kinds of things in their contracts, but the stock one, I think, should be at this point a regular one, because we're also used to it anyway. And the others, I think that, you know, start with a small percentage and just kind of, you know, work your way up. And it's not even a matter of like hit these targets every single time. It's just making sure that it's in their minds, so that it's we're not just, you know, headed to Simon's immediately for something.
And conversely, do you think that there's things that should be included to support, that might be able to support your ability to integrate those things into your design?
I think the budgets could also be reflective of that. Like sustainability is a little bit more expensive, sometimes a lot more expensive. So I think, you know, doing things cheaply is maybe not the thing we should be aiming for anymore. And I know that's a difficult one, especially with the smaller companies. But, you know, sometimes you think if you don't have the money to do this properly, should you be doing the show that you're doing? Should you do something on a smaller scale, or you know, with a different concept? And like, I'm not an artistic director, I'm not a director, so I'm just, you know, kind of, these things are just things that you think about often when we're asked to do something. Often we're asked, like, I'm sure Michelle has the experience, you're asked to do something with like $200, but clothe 9 people. So like, that is not sustainable in itself. And I think a lot of that has to shift. That thinking has to shift. Like, if you don't have the budget to do this properly, maybe don't do it. Maybe do something else and do it right, which is hard because you want to employ those 9 people, because those 9 people bring more people into the theater. So it's a difficult thing to gauge. But I think you know, you start small, and just like, even by having this conversation is something, like, hopefully something good happens out of it, and we all kind of think a little bit differently in the end.
Yeah.
Just so we're clear, I am taking notes. I didn't realize I could just say 25% stock.
Yeah, do it.
I'm learning new things. Thanks, guys.
Contracts are all made up. It's just what we agree to. As long as we agree to it, and doesn't put anybody in harm, I think that it's open. Shannon, you have pulled it up, and you've shared it within our private chat. I think it would be great if you did want to share the language that you've developed with your cohort at Triga.
Yeah, should I read it aloud?
If you'd like to,
or just post it.
We can share it out. Let's read it out loud. Let's hear what a green writer sounds like. So
this is eco-design addendum to contracts that Triga Creative, my company, will add to our contract. So Triga is committed to eco-design and will engage in the production with this approach. This implies prioritizing reused materials, local stores, and construction methods that plan for the future lives of design elements. Future lives may mean planning for the longevity of the design element itself beyond the runs of the production, or prioritizing construction plans that allow for the deconstruction so the materials can be reused in another show. There is an understanding that both Triga and the producer will strive to make ecologically responsible and socially just choices throughout the creation, production, and post-production processes. It is understood that the designer and the producer authorize the reuse of materials from the final designs for separate and external projects or concepts in order to avoid the waste of useful materials. Triga maintains the right of refusal to reuse materials and or design elements from the production, meaning that if we want to use it again, we get to. Recognizable design elements as defined by Triga are excluded from this agreement. Sort of meaning like, probably couldn't reuse our entire show. We would have to have some sort of a change. But that's what we came up with.
Have you been able to put it? How often has it been able to be put into play?
How many? I think it's been in play on all of our projects.
Mm-hmm.
So that would have been Auto twice. Did you see Event once? And then a trilogy, or no, two parts of a trilogy. So that's, I'd say at least 5 times.
Yeah. Excellent, thank you.
Yeah, I mean, I'd say it's a working document, and it probably could, it's interesting to hear how other people would interpret it too. But so far we've found it successful to even just be a piece of text that producers, technicians, everyone can sort of like get their teeth into.
Right. And it sets up that conversation that we were just talking about, that like if you've articulated that this is a way that you're interested and would like to prioritize working, then you can't have that conversation unless you open it up. And if you're doing it as early as the contracting stage, then it's there from the beginning as opposed to something that you're sneaking in later. Yeah. Not that it's sneaky, but just like that you're like, hey, what about this at the tail end of a meeting or something like this. Like it's something that is there from the beginning. Michelle, are there things that you would like to see in a green contract or writer?
I mean, not to sound like I didn't make any effort here, but I do really like Triga's rider. I think that is something that I would like to see happen. I mean, I'd also like to see, because we use so much lumber in our sets, it would be nice if theaters were planting the trees to replace what they are using. If we can be more conscious of how many trees we're using when we're building something, there are ways to calculate that. And so we can offset by then, donating to a tree planting charity or planting them ourselves or something along those lines. Also a dedication to, even when it's, a more difficult solution, to keep a lot of shows are contemporary in the smaller theaters and stuff, a dedication to keep that stuff out of landfill, whether it's by donating it to a shelter or to, other places where it will be used later, just to keep because a lot of smaller theaters do contemporary shows and this stuff goes into the garbage afterwards a lot of the times, although if I have anything to do with it, it won't. But there are conscious choices that you can make that are not always, quote unquote, the easiest solution, and they're not always the fastest solution. But they are the right socio-economic, responsible solution, that we have the ability to make a better choice. That's a huge privilege, and we should exercise that.
Yeah, that reminds me that one thing that, we haven't had an opportunity to do it too much in places we haven't been building much at York, is in the costing process, adding a column onto our budgeting sheets, which is just where is this going at the end of the show? And just by asking that question for every piece of material, you can't, even if you just start with that and you don't have a volume of something that you've measured, you can have the conversation of am I satisfied that this is doing that this is going to this place, this is going to this place. Am I happy with that? If I'm not, how would I change those sort of things?
Yeah, I think thinking about the what happens at the end of the show is really important because it will inform your choices from the beginning throughout.
Autumn, did you get some good notes? Okay, good. I'd like to bring us to our last question because we're already coming up on our time for this evening, and so sorry to put such a large question ultimately at the end of this, but we each have careers, but there's new designers coming into the field all the time. How should we start looking at design training? How should we start changing around design training so that designers are coming in? I'll offer an anecdote in having a conversation with someone from corporate responsibility at Cirque. That they're like, we want people coming in because, I mean, they're coming at it from a completely different perspective, that they want costumes that they can put on stage 8 times a week that multiple people can wear. They're like, so someone needs to know so they don't break down, so that and that they're responsible in all of the areas that they go to for that. So they needed people they're like, we need people to come in with sustainability training because otherwise we have to do it. How do we start to get those into our training programs? Don't turn it over to me, Shannon, because I'm a
I'm not. I think that if we're talking about training designers or training technicians, because I think that they are sort of part and parcel. You need designers to be able to think creatively in alignment with their values, not just checking their values at the door and being like, well, now I have to go to work where nothing matters, or like, it's the producer's responsibility. I think that sort of shift could be taught. I think a big part of this is sustainable can also mean like how you sustain yourself as a professional. So I'd say teaching designers to think like business people, because they're freelancers, they're gonna have to run their own business. How to negotiate. So if they're like, I'm gonna source everything secondhand, it's gonna take me 15 extra hours. I need to be paid for those hours. Those kinds of conversations, I think, could be integrated into design training, so people have something to back up their amazing ideas with. In terms of like thinking sustainably, I think that I don't know. I didn't go to theater school, but I think that theater artists generally are attracted to the collaboration and the restraints of theater. Otherwise, they would be visual artists. So I think it's sort of already in the DNA of a theater artist. So I don't know how you teach that. I think theater teachers are probably doing a pretty good job already. If they could expand it into sustainability, that would probably be excellent.
Jake Gao has a lovely statement about sustainability in theater being, it's kind of a requirement because we are low on budget, because we are low on time. It tends to have to be a little bit more quick, grab what you can, and we'll have to do this and we'll have to do this, which I think is really great. But I'm curious, I haven't thought about this question at all, but I'm curious if maybe even illustrating to students where that carbon footprint is actually coming from when we talk about what you're building out of. Perhaps we don't actually include that kind of information when we start talking about how we build a flat. Well, how much GHG emission is actually coming out of that? How many trees are with that? Where is that lumber coming from? Perhaps that's a way to get at least some people interested and maybe thinking about that. And in doing that, you can also craft them into a business sense of understanding that this is how much it costs on the carbon levels, but also this is how much it costs on the design levels. And that doesn't mean you're noodly into the nitty-gritty details, but it just gives you a little bit of a broader understanding of where those materials are coming from and how much impact they actually make.
Now I'm taking notes. Ming.
I think Shannon said something really interesting too about, if somebody wants to completely thrift a show, it is going to take longer. You have to go more places, you have to spend more time. And to that, when you start out as a new designer, you're often making between $2 and $5 an hour because you're doing everything. And, the amount of hours that you actually put in is just so much more than what the contract is. So I think there's some time management, when it comes to just thinking about, well, how much time is this going to take? And then, like Shannon said, going to the producer and saying, well, it's going to be an extra week. If you want this to like, I want to do this, you want this to come in under budget, it's going to cost you more in labor. So that's really interesting to me, I think, especially with the younger designers, because you're so eager to you want to do a good job, you want to get the show done, you want to be impressive, but there's a cost to that. And I think it's something that's kind of perpetuated to now, is that I can't remember what you can be cheap and good but not fast, you can have two but not three. Yeah, so I think that kind of works into what we're talking about here, is that but in under a lens of sustainability, you can't have it all. So if you want to be sustainable, which I think is a priority, you have to look at the other ways that it's going to impact your designers and the people that are working for you as well.
I think it's about learning to sustain yourself first. Like, just making sure that you're not taking those $2 jobs up, like $2 an hour. I mean, I totally feel like that's used to be, maybe still is, part of the cutting your teeth in the industry. I think that we can't really be ecologically sustainable if we're not being paid a living wage. So if we all negotiated our contracts, it might be more, even if it's just, I've negotiated a contract for 3 months to get an extra $200. It was so depressing. But I think that to have the grit to do that, if we all do it, it will help producers realize that we won't work for less than we're worth forever.
Yeah.
Or anymore, I'd say, anymore.
If we set ourselves at a higher value, we can set our values at a higher value as well. And sustainability does have a higher value in the long run. And it may not look like it does in the short run on paper, as you're saying, Shannon. But if we set ourselves at a higher value, it then sets the bar for that stuff to be more possible. As somebody who used to be in academia, I definitely think that it's something that can be taught. And it's something that Shannon has taught herself. I've taught myself. Autumn and Ming and Ian, we've all taught ourselves this. I didn't take a class for it, but it's something that if you are conscious of it, you automatically start making different choices because you're aware of the impact of your choices.
That was an excellent. We're at time, Shannon. I saw you unmute there. Do you have something?
I just want to say that's so correct.
Yes.
Right.
That's how I was going to take us out too. That the consciousness, being conscious of what we're doing, is the way that we're able to make change. Just as we're ending here, and right before I thank you, there were 5 key ideas now. Suddenly 5 key ideas came out of this. That consciousness allows you to make change, being conscious of what you've done. That we can use all the ideas and all of the constraints that these lead to a creative process themselves. So don't be afraid of them. Don't be shy about how you want to work and articulating that early and having that conversation. Take and find the time you need to make the changes, and really lean into the community and relationships that are embedded within a theatrical career to move this forward. Because if I'll put us out on a zinger, you can't make theater on a dead planet. On that note, I'm going to thank Shannon, Michelle, Ming, and Autumn for joining me this evening for our conversation. Thanks to our hosts with the Canadian Green Alliance and the Toronto Alliance for the Performing Arts and Singular Sensation, and everybody who joined us this evening. It's been a pleasure speaking with you all. Good night.
We may be crashing